everybody, welcome back to my channel, Trek Mission Log. I'm very glad that you're here today, and again I apologize for not being able to upload a video yesterday. I want to say hello to all my subscribers and to all my new subscribers. Thank you so much. Now we're getting close to that 300 subscriber mark, so maybe you can help me get there. I ask, if you enjoy this content, would you please go ahead and hit that subscribe button? It would mean a lot to me personally, and it would really help my channel out immensely. And when you do subscribe, please comment that you did subscribe, and it would give me a great opportunity to thank you personally for doing that. Also, you can check me out on Instagram at Trek Mission Log. We can certainly interact with each other there as well. Now today we're going to look at the original series, Season 2, Episode 17, titled A Piece of the Action. It was aired January the 12th, 1968. It was written by David P. Harmon and Gene L. Kuhn, directed by James Comack, and produced by John Meredith Lucas. So check out this piece of Trek trivia, and then we'll come back in and dive right into this great story. As the episode begins, the Enterprise is entering orbit around Sigma Iota 2. Uhura received a communication from Mr. Oxmix, who called himself the boss. Kirk speaks with him on audio and said that he is responding to the ship Horizon. The ship left the planet 100 years ago, but the Enterprise picked up the signal just a month ago because it was sent by old conventional radio waves. Kirk makes arrangements to beam down, and Oxmix said he would have a welcoming party to greet them. In the turbo lift, Spock and Kirk talk about how the Horizon interfered with the development of the Ioshan culture. They were in the pre-industrial stage of their development when the Horizon visited them. They are beaming now down to inspect and repair any contamination that the Horizon may have caused. Now, when they materialize, they see a city resembling 1920s Earth. Passers-by are carrying Tommy guns, and then they are met by Oxmix's welcoming committee. We then fade into the title sequence. Now, when we come back, we see that the landing party has been disarmed, and one of the henchmen is holding a phaser, which he calls a heater, and he puts it into his pocket. As they proceed to take the landing party to see Oxmix, a car comes along, and the people inside do a drive-by shooting, effectively killing one man. The henchman said it was a hit and that they need to get moving. En route, McCoy commented on the contamination. Kirk is confused because the crew of the Horizon were not murderers. They are then brought in to see Oxmix, who is playing pool. He invites Kirk to have a drink and to play pool with him. Kirk asks why the people call him boss. He said that he's the boss of his territory and that he has the biggest one in the whole world. Kirk asked if he is the government. He says, "What government?" He mentioned that there are about 12 territories, and each territory has its own boss. Spock is having a look around, and he notices a book titled Chicago Mobs of the 20s. Oxmix is talking about how he wants to expand his territory when Spock asked him if that includes a man named Krakow. We learn that Krakow is the one that was behind the hit. Oxmix orders his guy to hit back. Spock calls for Kirk, and he points out the book he notices to Kirk and McCoy. When Kirk asked about it, Oxmix said that it was the book. It was left by the other ship. Spock said that this is the source of the contamination. A whole civilization based on this book. Now, Oxmix told Kirk he brought them there to help him. He wants the Enterprise to supply them with heaters, which are phasers, to help him take over. Oxmix told Kirk that he had 8 hours to get him what he wants, or he would be killed. Oxmix is handed a phaser and a communication device. He then put the landing party in the warehouse under watch. When they leave, Oxmix calls up to the ship and he speaks with Scotty. And he told Scotty, I advanced one slide there. He told Scotty that he wanted the heaters and the troops to show him how to use them. And he gave Scotty 8 hours. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, Oxmix's men are playing cards and the landing party have some time to talk. McCoy talked about how that book became their Bible. Spock said that these people need to become united before total anarchy ensues. Kirk said that the Horizon caused this mess, and so it's up to them as members of the Federation to straighten it out. He asked Spock if he could get to the ship's psychology computers and see if he could find a solution. He then said he had an idea about how they can get out of this prison. Kirk talks about the card game that they're playing, presumably poker. And he said it's a kid's game. He said he knows a game that is a man's game and that it's beyond them. And they said, we can play any card game that there is. So he sat down and he said the name of this game is called Fizbin. Now, of course, it was a ruse to take control of the situation. Kirk was making it up on the spot. And when Kirk dropped a card on the floor, Spock gave a man the Vulcan nerve pinch, while Kirk and McCoy violently subdue the other two, taking their guns. Kirk told Spock to find the radio room and that he and McCoy would find the signal and then beam up. Kirk wants to get Oxmix and bring him to the ship. As Kirk runs outside, he is picked up by a man holding a gun who said that they were going to take a little ride. Spock and McCoy find the radio room, and he gives the woman controlling it the Vulcan nerve pinch. Spock is able to successfully find the ship's signal and calls up to the ship using the old radio and requests beam up. Meanwhile, Kirk has been brought to see Krakow. Krakow gets his female friend to appeal to Kirk's thought processes and wants Kirk to help him and promises Kirk a third of the spoils. Kirk offered a counter proposal that all of the bosses of all the territories sit down together and talk about how to best govern this planet. Krakow refused and put Kirk on ice. Kirk began looking around. He found an old radio. He opened it and he found wire inside. Now, back on the Enterprise, Spock has not been able to find a way out of this predicament using the ship's computers. Oxmix, using the communicator, calls up to tell Spock that Krakow has taken Kirk hostage and he wants Spock to come back down and offer to help get Kirk back. Spock asked about further hostility and Oxmix gave him his word that there would be none. So Spock agreed to beam down. Kirk is using the wire that he took from the radio as a tripwire. After it was said, he grabbed the blanket from the bed, he smashed the garbage can, and he yelled for help. One of the men ran in, he tripped over the wire, and Kirk subdued him and knocked him out. A second guy ran in, Kirk used the blanket to wrap him and gave him a powerful uppercut. He then grabbed the Tommy gun from under the bed and ran out. Before beaming down, Spock told Scotty to set the ship's phasers on stun in case it was needed. The second they materialize, Oxmix's henchmen subdue the landing party. As Oxmix takes their phasers and communicators, Spock tries to reason with him, but it wasn't working. Then Kirk comes in with a Tommy gun and forces Oxmix's men to drop their weapons. Kirk, in a hunch, begins acting and talking like these mobsters, and he orders the henchmen to get out of their suits. Kirk and Spock, now dressed in mobster garb, find a car, and Spock tries to coach Kirk on how to use it. And in a brilliant display, Kirk drives worse than I did when I was learning how to drive. And after they reach their destination, Spock said, "You are an excellent starship commander, but as a taxi driver, you leave much to be desired." Now, as they're trying to figure out how to break into Krakoa's headquarters, a child from the street offers to help them, and all he wants is a piece of the action. Kirk agrees, and they shake on it. The kid provides a distraction so that Kirk and Spock could come and subdue them. And it worked. They walk in, they stun two of the guards. However, when Krakoa sees them, two more guards come in and subdue Kirk and Spock. Now, Kirk begins to sow some seeds of doubt in Krakoa about the phasers, and he said, "Do you trust your men? Because one of these heaters could make a boss pretty powerful." Krakoa looks around with some doubt on his men, and he wants to go into a private area where they can talk. Kirk takes the phasers back and said that the Federation was taking over. In mobster language, Kirk was telling them that they were going to help this planet establish a democratic government. Krakoa agrees to the deal. Kirk calls up to the ship and makes arrangements for Scotty to beam Krakoa up. And when he does, Kirk and Spock subdue Krakoa's men. On the ship, Krakoa said to Scotty that he demands answers, and Scotty told him to mind his place or he'll be wearing concrete galoshes. Meanwhile, Krakoa's boys come out of their state of being knocked out, and they come up with a plan to hit Oxmix's place hard. Kirk and Spock come into Oxmix's headquarters. He calls up to the ship and he tells Scotty that Oxmix is going to make calls to the other bosses and wants him to beam them over once he gets their signal. So Oxmix makes the first call and the first boss is beamed over. Krakoa's men are now ready to make their hit. Meanwhile, Kirk is in conversation with all the other bosses and said that the Federation is stepping in. Kirk is cutting the Federation in for 40% of their profits. There was some talk about how there are only a few guys. What Federation? It's at that point that Krakoa's men begin their hit. Krakoa takes control and Kirk asks to call the ship to say goodbye. Krakoa allows it. Kirk calls up to the ship and tells Scotty to use the phasers to hit the whole block. He does, and all the people on the block got knocked out in an instant. All the bosses are shocked at this display of power. Kirk then names Oxmix as the leader and Krakoa as the lieutenant. And they're going to form a government, which he called business. And the Federation will be back once a year to get their cut. When all agree, they seal the deal with a drink. Now, back on the ship, McCoy and Spock seem to be in somewhat of a dismal mood. Spock is a little bothered that criminals are now in charge of the planet, and that Kirk has to explain to Starfleet how the Federation is going to come once a year to collect their cut. Kirk said that he's going to suggest that the money be put into planetary treasury to guide the Iosians into peaceful government. Now, to McCoy. McCoy said to Kirk that he believes that he left his communicator in Oxmix's office. It's funny how at the beginning of the episode he complained about the contamination, and now he may be the one who recontaminates them. Kirk said that they'll no doubt take it apart, figure out how it works, and maybe someday they'll come back to demand a piece of their action. And at that point, the Enterprise sails away to its next mission. interesting episode. This was a great story. Lots of good things going for it with very few weaknesses. So let's go through this. First of all, the opening sequence was fantastic. It lasted almost 3 minutes. It set the story up very well. 100 years ago, a ship visited this planet when they were in their pre-industrial time period, but the culture got contaminated by interference from people on that ship. The planet sent out an old radio signal, but it took years to reach Federation space. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy beam down to see how far along the contamination is, and they discover that it is very much an Earth setting from 1920s filled with mobsters. The Horizon left them a book about Chicago mobs of the 1920s, and this imitative people based their whole society on that book. It became a holy book to them. A very intriguing premise. Now, the premise intrigues me because as a Christian, I have a book that I love, the Holy Bible. And that book has influenced societies and civilizations for, let's say, the last 2,000 years, like no other. So this episode definitely held my interest. Unfortunately, the book they followed was about Chicago mobs. More than leaving the book, the Horizon left them the means to construct radios and to build powerful weapons, and as a result, the mobs rivaled against each other and were constantly at war. A very strong story with lots of lessons, and that is why the Federation has a prime directive, and in this case, the Federation now had an obligation to step in and try to set things right. Kirk wanted to get these bosses talking. Now, the set on the planet and the costumes were terrific. I love the performances of Ox, Mix, and Krakow. They were comical. They were believable. It was great to see the old-style Tommy guns, the old suits and hats, and the dresses, and more importantly, the old cars. It was very, very cool. William Shatner was once again very much on display in this episode, but in a good way. Leonard McCoy and DeForest Kelley also had great performances here. Kirk had some very clever ways to get out of the hostage situations. If I counted correctly, 3 times. The first was a game of Fizbin, second was a tripwire, and then third, using the ship's phasers. Very, very cool, very clever. Leonard Nimoy was brilliant in this episode. He tried to be logical in a very illogical situation, and he adapted to the situation very well. If you watch this episode, pay close attention to him. Near the end, after Oxmix makes the first phone call, Nimoy points the gun at him in a very mean mobster voice, said, "I suggest you make the next call, Oxmix." I absolutely love that. All the crime bosses knew that the way the planet was being run was not working. They saw the need for unification, but they needed help. And so Shatner's dialoguing in mobster language, I think, really aided that along. I love the performance in this episode. I also love the contrast in this episode from the beginning to the end. At the beginning, McCoy was complaining about how the ship was contaminated, that the ship contaminated this planet 100 years ago, but in the end, he accidentally leaves his communicator behind and nonchalantly risks contaminating them again. Maybe the contamination from 100 years ago was not as black and white and clear-cut as he thought. The end of the episode really gets you thinking. Could this communicator bring them further ahead in their advancement as a society? Could they end up building big starships and come after the Federation? I mean, they are criminals that got left behind after all. Interesting thoughts. Leads me to think, I guess, a little bit about my own life, about my influence. I have 3 children. Have I been a good influence on them? Has my behaviors as a dad contaminated them in any way? I found this episode very, very thought-provoking. A very cool thing about this episode is that there is a tie-in to this episode in the series Star Trek Enterprise, in which the Horizon makes an appearance. And in one of the crew members' quarters is a hardbound book titled Chicago Mobs of the 20s. Very, very interesting. There are two areas of weakness in this episode that I saw. First and foremost, Sulu again was not present. George Takei was in the jungle, hanging out with John Wayne, filming the Green Berets. And the rest of the regular cast were only in the episode for a short amount of time. It would have been great to see them involved more. And I also think that a follow-up episode, or even a motion picture, to see the effects of the communicator being left behind would have been really, really cool to see. All things considered, this was an excellent episode, and I give it 5 out of 5 Starfleet insignias for awesomeness. Please don't miss this one. Well, that wraps up this edition of Trek Mission Log, and I sincerely hope that you enjoyed it. Please drop a comment below. I love to read them. I would love your take on the episode, a piece of the action. I would love your thoughts, even if you disagree with my assessment. I do my best to respond to all of them, and I do read all of them. I also thank you for your thoughts and prayers for my daughter. She had a nasty fall the other day, and she banged her knee up pretty bad. Thankfully, nothing is broken, but she does have a bad case of bursitis, and the doctors say it's going to pass eventually. So I thank you for that, and thank you for your thoughts and your prayers and your well wishes. I'm grateful. Next time, we're going to look at an episode titled The Immunity Syndrome, and I hope that you won't be immune to watching it. Until then, live long and prosper.